Chapter 331. Get it done. Dominic left them to sort out the details while he discussed the structural details with Suni and the male mages of the Purity sect that he had taken in as his work crew. With so many mages, the projects were completed in record time, and it was actually the interior details that most of the new buildings were waiting on. The mages were good at rough work, but if you wanted a smooth planed floor, decent-looking cabinetry, or other details, you still needed a carpenter. What the mages did was primarily just assemble the building itself and run the plumbing so that someone else could put in the finishing details. So, we need a large common area with separate event areas so that the officers can be divided from each other when tensions are high, and then an underground event area with a separate entrance that is disguised? Why does this sound shady? Suni asked as he read Dominic's blueprints. Not at all. Think of it like a private gentleman's club for after-hours events that aren't officially sanctioned by their commanding officers. That's where all the real work gets done, so we might as well build it into the plans. Dominic offered. Suni smiled. I get what you mean, Your Grace. We will certainly want the Adventurers Guild for this one. The Merchants Guild is good for many things, but for an after-hours retreat that isn't an auction, they're not the best choice. Everyone expects them to be trying to make money on anything they touch. Dominic chuckled at his confirmation of their reputation. The guild is just getting trounced today. Everyone has the same opinion of them. Is there someone else that we should look for, other than the mercenaries or adventurers?
He suggested. Suni shook his head.
No, they're the best choice. In most big cities, the casinos are run by the Thieves' Guild. But I'm sure you can understand why they're not the best option for an unofficially sanctioned event. We can start on the building right away and have it all ready to go in 2 days. The problem is that we won't have any of the furniture or gaming tables available. So, it might work as a grand ballroom, but that's about it until we get another shipment. Dominic frowned. Well, we can only do what we can do. I will have to keep the officers entertained until then. But on the bright side, we've got volunteers to bring fresh produce deliveries and medicines to the troops. The architect laughed. I swear that a group of soldiers could stop in a village of Vestal Virgins and come back with things that medicine has no name for. It's a good thing that the witches are willing to work with you. But that gives me an idea. We could set up a portion of the new building as a clinic. The healer and the midwife are happier living out in the woods, but that's a long way for the sick and injured to go. We should try to find a doctor, or get the troll to come to town to work. Dominic considered that and shook his head. I will look for another solution. Mostly he does house calls now, and I can't see him being comfortable with a shop in town. His wife might be, though. The midwives are also mostly on call, though. Perhaps we need an apothecary shop instead? They could fill prescriptions from the witches or the midwives. Suni shrugged. Not really my department, but I will design the building to have a shop off to one side. If nothing else, the guild can use it as their office. Then, the last question is, where do we put it?
Suni asked.
Dominic calculated the answer for a moment, then smiled. Put it on the west side of town, near the Heroes' Memorial. Adventurers like that sort of somber reminder, and the only thing on that side of town is the market. Putting all the adventurers near the market, and as far as possible from the manor, will create a second line of defense if we're attacked. It will also cut the response time to the fields on that side of town, and give the illusion that the Duke was not paying attention to what went on through the side door of the building. And for expanded visitor lodging? Just the upper level of this building? Or are we doing another inn? Dominic shook his head. No need for one yet. The officers of the visiting armies can stay on the upper level of the new building, party on the main, and hide in the basement. All in one functionality. Then, when they're not here, it can earn enough for cleaning staff off the adventurers. Suni made notes and a few adjustments to the blueprints. Dominic had gravely miscalculated how many adventurers they were likely to get here, but he wasn't going to tell the Duke that they were going to need another building in the next few months, once everyone started to show up here. He had enough work already, and there were airship docks to build after this. All right, boys. Let's get on this. It's a simple structure, all stone. So, we will hammer as much of this out today as we can, and then we will start on the airship docks. Fortunately for Suni, The king of Signia had not intended to leave him to suffer alone when Westover was chosen to host the political meetings. Only hours later, while Dominic was making his rounds of the farms and hunters' houses to ensure that everyone knew what was going on, two Signia airships appeared on the horizon. Both were filled with techno-mages and magitech construction workers, ready to build the facilities to house the meetings, as well as the airship docks. Suni wasn't the only one shocked by the situation, though. Prince George of Mitfield hadn't known that they were going to send a full construction team to Westover, and the construction team hadn't known that Prince George was going to be here before they arrived. They had expected to show up to a rural village with 100 impoverished farmers, not a growing small town with active industry and 10,000 soldiers on their doorstep. Chapter 332. With help. Dominic jogged back to the clearing near the manor to greet the airships as they landed. Your Grace, the 17th Royal Infrastructure Group has been dispatched to assist Westover in preparing for imminent diplomatic meetings. A multi-nation meeting has been scheduled, and your town has been selected for the honor. The leader of the group declared the moment he saw Dominic. I was aware of that. Prince George of Mitfield is here already, as he wished to spend some time visiting with Princess Alexis. We have been working on town planning so that the new buildings don't cause too much traffic chaos. Please do follow me inside, and I will explain it all over coffee. We grow and roast our own here, you see. Dominic replied. The engineer smiled, an expression that turned his whole face into a mass of wrinkles. Oh, now that is most wonderful news. I did pack good coffee from home, but there is nothing quite like a freshly roasted cup. What part of the new construction are your lads working at now? I will send some mages over to assist them. He asked. I am having them build a convention center that will double as the Adventurers Guild house when it's not in use for political meetings. One tall level, with rooms above for dignitaries and adventurers. But as they've sent so many of you, perhaps I can prevail upon you to assist with rebuilding the damaged houses in town? We've started, but we're short on manpower, you see. Of course, Your Grace. What is your vision for the village? A quaint wave mate's landholding. The old man asked. Dominic shook his head. Traditional styling, over the most advanced magitech city in the world. We're building from scratch, so we're going all out. The apartments just went up, and we've got magitech pumps for constant running water, hot showers, magitech toilets, and fireplaces for cooking. There are no conventional appliances or a need for wood or coal fuel anywhere in town, except a few of the tractors. That is how we'd like to keep it, even on bachelor apartments and worker residences. The large structure behind you is the new factory. We will be turning out magitech fireplace inserts and lamps soon. They're just doing a run of canning jars for the farmers now. The engineer looked impressed. I must say, I hadn't expected such vision. Wavemates often preferred the old magics, so I had expected witch charms hung everywhere, and little technology. We've got witches of the traditional and the garden variety as well, but that's for medicine and crops. The duchy purchased a number of steam tractors, so our farmers can work larger portions of land. The cost will be taken from our portion of their tithe, naturally. The increase in productivity is more than worth the investment. What else was there?
Right. Stone streets.
I don't want any dirt roads within Westover, and we will have stable facilities for horses as far from the town itself as feasible. The engineer nodded.
All right.
I think that I can make that work. Let's see those plans. They waited as another half-dozen older mages came over before Dominic led them into the manor and to the smaller sitting room, as the two royals were still chatting in the lounge, completely engrossed in their conversation. Everyone quietly examined the city plan that Dominic and Alexis had made while planning their developments and began to split up work. You sound like you plan to be here for some time, Dominic noted. The engineer shrugged. Well, typically these sorts of infrastructure projects are on a 3-year timeline. The planning stage often takes the full first year, then we need to relocate farmers and shops to redevelop everything. Dominic nodded. I don't intend to change the town center at all. It's already quite advanced and I like the style. However, we can build in a more modern way around it. The farms don't reach the village, a precaution made by the previous inhabitants against conflicts between livestock and residents. That gives us a large clear zone on this side of the river, but the other side is heavily farmed. If we expand past the manor into Old Signia, There are no farms at all, and very few hunters. This portion is strictly off-limits for development. Those woods must remain as they are. Other than that, we can expand the town as much as needed. That works. If we put Teams 2 and 3 on the rebuilding of the damaged houses, Team 4 can help with the new meeting building. There are royal standards for magical protections to be placed on the building so that they are secure while official meetings are being held. He explained. I had intended to have the envoys meet in an expanded portion of the manor itself, while the officers met in the secondary building. Dominic explained. Oh, splitting them up so that spies are under the impression that the idle nobles are idling, while the political officers do all the hard work. The old man asked. Dominic shrugged. They might be right. For all I know, the envoys that they send might just be figureheads here to entertain each other with updates from their officers while I play host. I believe that is supposed to be an inside thought, Your Grace. He wasn't wrong, but you certainly were not supposed to say that part out loud. Dominic took out the plans for the expansion of the manor. This is what I would like. 4 new guest suites, an expanded ballroom, more offices, and an expansion of the basement cold storage area. Having frozen meat is better than cured or dried if you're making fancy dishes for the nobles and don't want to rely on the day's hunt. The engineer frowned, then nodded. Are you set on this design?
No.
It's just what we came up with as a practical solution to the situation. However, if you intend to change the interior theme, you should speak with the princess. She is the one who chose it. Chapter 333, Royal Infrastructure Group. Dominic laughed at the panicked look on the man's face. Being sent to plead with a princess to modify her request was never a fun situation, and he didn't know Alexis on a personal level, only her reputation as strong-willed and violent. Don't worry about it too much. She is quite reasonable. However, she is currently meeting with Prince George, and they have a lot of catching up to do. They were close in her childhood, you see. He explained. The engineer nodded. Yes, I recall that he was often in the capital. That is quite all right. We will work on the plans for the next few days, and then propose the full renovation of the manor to her requested specifications. That was the mission assigned to Team 1. Dominic patted the man on the shoulder. You have been given quite the honor, redesigning an entire manor to suit one of the king's favored daughters. But I am certain that you are up for it. If you need, you can take the time to explore the grounds. Just watch out for the goats. They are a bit territorial. He would warn them to watch out for the blink cat, but if they couldn't figure that much out on their own, a warning wouldn't help them. By the way, how many men did you bring in total? 100 men. All mages or techno-wizards. We also brought tools, some materials, and other essentials for our stay here. Dominic sighed. Then we have an additional problem. We don't have 100 residences open yet. There might be half that many open units in the apartment blocks, but they're mostly made for singles or couples who do not yet have children. The units for small families were snapped up right away. The engineer shrugged. It's not a worry. They can set up bedrolls on the floor until they build another apartment block. It's better than spending the first week in a tent, especially if the apartment has a proper privy and a shower. You should see some of the horrid conditions that we exist in while doing road work through rural holdings. Dominic chuckled. A nice wet bed along the roadside while you wait for a storm to pass. Don't forget the mud, the layered animal dung ground in and pushed off the old road, and the angry travelers who have to bypass us while hurling insults as we work. The engineer agreed. Or when they make us rebuild bridges that are still under siege, or try to engineer our way through the southern swamps, despite the fact that they have been told that there is no realistic way to set a roadbed. One of the other men added helpfully. Dominic laughed. They didn't ask what was realistic, they asked for a road. The 2 men both rolled their eyes. That's exactly what the Minister of Infrastructure said to us when we told him that the road was impossible. How did that end? The engineer shrugged. The road now runs around the perimeter of the swamp, and there is no direct route from Hertbury to Biverlow. All right, I will let everyone get started on their work. Julio has a list of vacant units that they can choose from, and you can decide how they are to be arranged while the next round of housing is decided. Will there be families joining the men? Dominic replied.
Some of them.
Normally, a portion of the men choose to stay behind, while the majority move on to the next project. Some jobs lose more men than others, either to injury, illness, or marriage. It's somewhat inevitable. The work pays decently well, and the signing bonus can be enough to settle with a wife in a newer house or small farmstead. That's all most common men are after, anyhow. The old man replied with a casual shrug. So the team is mostly men from small towns who didn't find a wife at home? Precisely. Dominic smiled at the few men who remained after the others departed to get started on their tasks. How about we go see the princess? She should be ready for us by now. Dominic suggested, after seeing that one of her maids was waiting by the door. They were just about to respond when Julio came running in. My lord, there are more visitors incoming. A whole flotilla of airships with the Axbridge royal emblems on them. He gasped. Dominic sighed. How did everyone make it here without anyone noticing? The Castellan just shrugged. If they flew straight here from Witheten, there are no towns along the route. Well, no major ones. So, they likely flew right between Coster and Limpsbury above cloud cover, and nobody reported their presence. Dominic sighed. Gentlemen, we will have at least one more project to add. We're going to need long-range monitoring abilities so we can at least see people coming. And Julio? Please inform the princess that she needs to contact the king. Unless she's going to be our envoy for this meeting, they will have to send someone. I will go meet our guests. We brought mechanical horses as gifts for yourself and the princess. You can collect one from the airships on your way by. The cargo handlers will certainly still be busy. The engineer suggested. You know exactly what a man needs. But I have forgotten your name. Marcos, your grace. Royal Engineer Marcos. Dominic nodded and walked away. Then once there was nobody watching, he began to jog toward where the first batch of airships had landed. The cargo handlers were marshalling in the new fleet, but it was much larger than the group from Signia. They had a total of 50 ships, all massively oversized. Dominic's keen eyes could tell that they were not attack vessels, but bulk troop carriers. So, Axbridge had most likely brought a force equivalent to what Mitfield had sent, and now the hosts were the last to arrive. A bit embarrassing, but at least they weren't lacking for a ranking host. With a princess and duke, they had noble courtesy covered, even if they were lacking in facilities. Unless the king of Axbridge had come in person. Chapter 334. Axbridge arrives. When the first airship to land started to disembark, an entire unit of Axbridge Royal Guards, Dominic began to fear that he had jinxed himself with his wayward thoughts. However, the royal who followed them out, already mounted on a mechanical horse in gold-plated barding, was a young man, likely no older than Dominic himself. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in an impasse. The lower-ranked should introduce themselves to the higher, but neither was exactly clear on whom the other man was. Greetings, Highness. I am Dominic Wavemates, Duke of Westover, and husband of the royal princess, Alexis Cygnus. Dominic began. The prince sighed in relief, then nodded politely. Duke Westover, I am Prince Fahad, heir apparent to the throne of Axbridge. My congratulations on your recent nuptials. I do hope that we are not too early, though I see at least one force has arrived ahead of us. Dominic nodded. Prince George of Mitfield and his men arrived in advance, so the prince could spend some social time with Princess Alexis. They are longtime friends, you see. Prince Fahad nodded. I am aware of their bond. Tell me, is it true that the princess maintained her position within the royal paladins even after marriage? Dominic nodded. The order doesn't ban matrimony, so there was no reason to dissolve the appointment. No reason except a husband who might be rightfully fearful of a heavily armed and violent wife. Most noblemen were not in love partnerships, but political marriages. It was safer for them if their wife was not encouraged to carry weapons. Prince Fahad smiled, approving of Dominic's attitude toward marriage and the princess. While he wasn't too familiar with Princess Alexis, he was in full support of royal daughters being allowed to choose their partners wherever possible. So tell me, Duke Westover, what holding did you originate from? I see that you have kept the Wavemate's surname in honor of the fallen Dragon King. Fahad asked. I'm actually from right here in Westover, the inheritor of this land by birthright, kin to the former Earl Westover and the royal consort. Dominic replied easily, but the words froze the prince in his saddle. From Westover? But there was only one survivor? Yes, I am told that the Dago's army made me somewhat infamous. However, the king of Signia didn't object when I came to work in his capital. Did you know I actually spent many years in Axbridge? You have a lovely nation, your highness. Dominic agreed. Prince Fahad bowed politely, then shook his head in dismay. Do you know how many times Dagos came to the palace, insisting that you had escaped into our nation, and demanding that we send teams to apprehend you during the years after Wavemates fell?
8.
Dominic guessed. They sent 32 different military officers with the same petition the first season alone. That's a bit excessive. If they considered me a renegade foreign general, asking a mere 4 times a year would be considered overbearing. Even if they had only come during the years that I was actually in Axbridge, Dominic replied with mock sincerity. I like you, Dragon Prince. But now that I know who you are, there are some issues at the lower level that we should discuss. Do you have a private space? Dominic tilted his head toward the manor. We have soundproofed sitting rooms. If you need to discuss something personal there, we can do so without being overheard. I suspect that I already have a good idea what the issue is, and there are some other matters to discuss as well. However, we should get your men settled. This region isn't being worked yet, so it's fine to leave the airships here if they're grounded for the duration of your visit. However, the men would be better accommodated another kilometer out. That puts them directly across from the midfield troops, with the town in the center. But it also puts them a bit further above the river, so their tents won't get as wet. The rainy season is about to start, and unfortunately, we are not well designed to accommodate so many. However, our food production has been quite outstanding, and I will have carts sent every morning to fill any orders that your chefs might have for fresh produce and grains. Prince Fahad nodded. I appreciate it, as will my men. Is there an officer's lounge in town? By the end of the week, the men will be getting restless. They're building it now. A convention center with officers' barracks above it. Give us a few days, and we will have it all sorted. The men are quite skilled, and Signia sent us a whole infrastructure team to assist. They were not expecting such an early arrival of the envoys, though. Dominic hinted. Prince Fahad shrugged. We saw that others had mobilized, so we did as well. Father doesn't believe in letting anyone get a head start on negotiations. So, everyone was here because Prince George brought an entire army to come see his favorite Signia princess. That sounded like about the level of political headache that Dominic should have seen coming. Shall we see your men to their campsite? I notice you still have ships waiting in formation. Dominic commented casually. Of course. The airships will all land here, if you have no objections. Is the ground solid enough for anchoring? Dominic nodded. It should be. I haven't specifically tested it, but most of the ground here is heavy clay, so airship anchors should screw in easily enough to keep them tethered. The farmers were going to have fits now that there were 20,000 soldiers camped outside of town. But they had been concerned a few days ago about how much food they could ship or can for long-term storage. That would no longer be a problem. Once they had set aside all that they needed, they could easily sell all the rest to the visiting armies. They were going to need more garden witches, though. A 5-person coven might be enough for medicine, but the fields would need more help to keep a city worth of soldiers happy. 1 milli wasn't going to cut it. Chapter 335, Uncommon Knowledge. Dominic and Prince Fahad waited while the rest of the Axbridge soldiers and officers landed. They were moving efficiently to the designated location to set up camp, but a few ranking officers remained with the prince, on top of the 10 men from his royal guard. That was still a manageable size for the manor, though it was going to start getting crowded at the dinner table, and Dominic began making plans to have the royal guards of the princes eat at staggered intervals. It was a normal safety measure, but moving 16 of the 20 royal guards from the princes along with most of Princess Alexis' royal guard to a second sitting would make the kitchen's job much easier. They could also take out the secondary banquet tables, but he would leave that choice to them, as there were only so many staff members in the house. Once most of the soldiers were on the ground, Dominic led Prince Fahad to the house, where Castellan Julio met them at the door with a pair of maids. If you would like to freshen up before your meetings, Julio can escort you to your rooms first. Dominic offered. The prince shook his head. No, we should discuss this first, and I will change for dinner after. It might not be the sort of major international issue that we all need to discuss together, but it is an urgent matter. That sounded intriguing. In that case, please follow me. Fahad motioned for the juniors who had followed them to follow Julio, while his guards followed the prince and Dominic into the second sitting room. Fahad activated the spells on the room as soon as they sat down, and then took out a binder full of loose papers. Word of your return has spread across the continent faster than anyone had expected, Lord Dominic. The great western plains of Axbridge have more nomads today than the last 10 years combined, and the army has determined that they are mostly coming here. Not just back to Stantia province, but here, to Westover. At our nearest estimate, there are close to 20,000 magic users and non-humans planning to gather in Westover, and none of them have any intentions of peaceful coexistence with the old nations. Prince Fahad began the moment that the room was sealed. Dominic sighed and went to the side cabinet. The top flipped open to reveal a set of glasses and decanters, left from the previous earl. This is going to need a drink. What is your preference, your highness? He asked. Whiskey. Make it a double. I am not certain that you fully appreciate the gravity of the situation, as you are also proudly non-human. Prince Fahad replied, with a nod towards Dominic's horns. Lesser illusion won't hide my horns. The moment that the light hits them, the spell breaks. I can disguise my face if I have my head covered. That's not a problem. However, the lineage of the world dragon seems resistant to disguise. Dominic replied. He also had terrible luck with his hats coming off at the worst possible moment, and he fully blamed the magic of his horns for it. So, you have no choice but to be known as non-human. But that's the same to these migrants. They have all been driven out of their homes because of their lineage at some point. The refugees from old wavemates who are looking to return are only a small issue. They are eager to return, but along with them are thousands of monster-blooded sorcerers, dark mages, and bandits. Every one of them sees the rumors of a rebuilt Westover as the promise of a safe haven, like a free port to pirates, where they can settle and start over in relative anonymity. If that happens and they truly become bandits or an organized army, Westover will be a threat not only to their neighboring nations, but to Signia itself. Fahad explained. Dominic considered the options for a few long seconds. Well, vetting the troublemakers isn't much of a problem. My power level isn't as high as I would hope, but it's getting better. Given a few more months, I think that I will reach a level where I can properly defend the town against most low-level mages. Fahad chuckled. But can you vet them? How many of them intend to create trouble within Westover? Perhaps a few of the bandits are looking to set up operations with Westover as a hiding spot, but you do have a certain reputation for dealing with those who endanger your people. My father's advisors believe that they intend to start over, using their skills to become businessmen or somewhat legitimate craftsmen, but only for as long as they are being actively hunted by those from their former homeland, and then they will start to agitate for a free state for non-humans. That is the real danger that has everyone else concerned. While many nations have a large non-human population, there are no non-human nations on the continent. The prince paused, and Dominic frowned. Any more, you mean? Because Wavemates was, though there were still many more humans than non-humans. Right, before I forget. There is a village of trolls a day's march from town, and they might be within your troops' patrol range. Kindly don't attack them. And that friendly interaction between nobles and monsters is exactly what has everyone else so concerned. If they settle within your territory in small groups, we have little to worry about. However, if the town of Westover starts building multiple mage towers and housing demi-human armies, the old trauma will cause the kings to panic. Dominic frowned at the prince's words as he sipped the fine liquor. What do you mean, old trauma? How much do you know of the history of Wavemates before the Dragon Kings? Fahad asked. Essentially nothing. The last 200 or 300 years had decent documentation, but before that there wasn't anything in my curriculum as a child. If any documents survived, they weren't taught as common knowledge. Dominic explained. I suppose they wouldn't be. They're not taught to anyone but royals in most nations. Chapter 336. Expired Treaties. Prince Fahad continued in a serious and somber tone. In fact, I'm not certain that Signia teaches them at all, either. After all, at the time their clan king was Dragonkin as well. It's not a fact that they like to openly acknowledge these days. Axbridge still passes the memories directly, with a memory stone. All royal heirs and potential heirs are given the important memories of our ancestors so that the knowledge isn't lost. What you likely know is that the final few Dragon Kings were pacifists. But they were that way because of the uprising. At one time, close to 600 years ago, the monster clans were organized. They marched from the fjords of what is now the Burlish Empire across the continent. At the time, the humans of the eastern nations were nomadic tribes, with only a few towns fully settled. So, there was no real resistance as they moved across the southeast, scattering the tribes. Only when they came north did their invasion slow. You see, the trolls and dragons of Wavemate's clan were violently territorial, and when the Ogre King's army entered their territory, a massive war erupted. The humans saw this as their chance, and 30 clans united to join the battle on the side of the Wavemate's clan. Working together, they scattered the monster armies, but the Ogre King escaped. Still, it seemed like the end of his ambitions, and the war was over. Then, as you have probably already guessed, the 30 allied clans turned on the Wavemate's clan. They were mighty, and the first Dragon King's forces were depleted from the war. But they didn't win. The Wavemate's clan returned to their territory, and after another decade of war, the old king passed his throne to his son, the first Dragon King. He made a magically binding deal with the human clans. They would stop attacking Wavemates and its demi-human tribes, and in exchange, he wouldn't take up where the Ogre King left off and wipe out the human clans of the northeast. From then on, the Dragon Kings were pacifists and the humans signed non-aggression pacts. Naturally, they didn't last long. Humans have short memories, but the Dragon Kings remembered, and when they were invaded, they refused to call the monster and dragon clans to battle, fearing that a continent-wide war would begin. Now, there is no Dragon King, and the treaties are expired. That is where our current problems start. Without that treaty and the protection of the Dragon King's magic, what will stop a new invasion? Nobody else seems to remember that there was a good reason the monster clans were nothing more than a scattered threat. What would happen if Dagos attacked again, and you had an army of half-ogres at your disposal? Or 10,000 beast-blooded mages to back up a battalion of trolls? Would they stop when Dagos fell? Or would they keep going until they were certain that the humans wouldn't try to wipe them out again? A brief vision of glory flashed through Dominic's mind. A giant golden dragon, leading an army of sorcerers and trolls through Dagos, crushing everything underfoot. And they would. It wouldn't even be a fair fight. With the magic of the demi-humans and the regeneration of the trolls, an entire army led by a new Dragon King, especially with Magitech weapons, would decimate anything that he aimed them at. Once the initial thought faded, Dominic sighed and shook his head. The Dragon King might have been a fool to keep to his noble notions of pacifism when Dagos happily killed every member of his lineage they could find, but you are right. If anyone had unified the demi-humans and called them to war, they would have rampaged. If you're not aware, there isn't anywhere on the continent that the sorcerers and other monster-blooded species are treated well. Unified, such an army would be a nightmare for their enemies. Can you imagine trying to take down a battalion of half-ogres in a sword fight? Prince Fahad nodded. Oh, I can imagine it. We even ran battle simulations once we saw the composition of the nomadic tribes coming your way. What we determined was that Axbridge alone would be unlikely to win, and most of them are currently in our territory, so the rest of the continent would see it as a civil war. The king is of the opinion that we should encourage them to come to Stantia province, then to disperse. Which implies that you are of a different opinion. Dominic noted. Prince Fahad nodded. I believe that it is actually safer to have them all in one spot. As happened in Kainwin during the Dagos invasion, the concentration of population makes it easier to contain a problem. But more than that, I agree with many of the nomadic tribal leaders that rebuilding Westover as a magical city is for the best. It will give them a sense of home and slowly remove those feelings of otherness that have kept them as nomads and outcasts. So, you're caught in a dilemma. Bringing so many powerful people to one spot is a threat, and Axbridge doesn't fully trust me not to wage war on behalf of the non-humans. But you also hold on to the hope that having a territory full of sorcerers and demi-humans again might cut down on the banditry and violent nomadic tribal issues your nation suffers from. Dominic guessed. Not far from the truth. Now, can we come to some agreement that you will take in these nomads and help them settle? Truly settle, not just hide and work as bandits based in Westover. Dominic sipped his drink and smiled. I think we can come to an agreement. Some of the bandits should be fine to give up their old ways and settle here. The rest we will deal with. But the nomadic mage tribes are what we have been looking for in town. You see, I have magitech factories going up and a need for skilled workers. Prince Fahad smiled. I will have my soldiers guide them your way, with the promise of a town to call home under an heir of the Dragon King and the nation of Signia. Chapter 337. Fahad. Dominic did a quick mental calculation of all the new infrastructure they would need to house all these new arrivals, then nodded. Yes, that will work very well. As long as your numbers are right. Anyhow, Axbridge is easily 50 times the size of Stantia province, so the number of nomads will add up quickly if there are enough to pose an issue in your nation. I would appreciate it if you could sort out the bandit groups before they reached our borders, though. I'm certain that King Signia would agree with that. Dominic noted. Prince Fahad chuckled. I am quite certain that he would. But that will be part of the treaties and negotiations that will be starting later. The civil war in Dagos, and its aftermath, are of great international concern. We also have reason to believe that the Skipple Royal Academy has been compromised. Many of their elders are missing, as well as recent graduates and some senior students. Dominic nodded. I knew that already. We killed some of them who were leading armies of mind-controlled monsters, the same as the groups that invaded Signia not long ago. We couldn't be certain whether they were exiles or defectors, but we found items issued by the Academy on many of the dead. They didn't self-destruct? Normally, they put a protective spell on themselves to destroy their bodies after death. Prince Fahad asked. Dominic nodded. Some of them did. Some didn't get the chance. How does a mage not get a chance to raise their protective spells? Trollish club to the back of the head. It's surprisingly effective when the mage thinks the troll is their ally. Fahad winced. That's just nasty. Have you had many issues with such forces? Dominic nodded. A few. Prince Russell currently has a cavalry force out hunting them between here and Mitfield. Prince George of Mitfield ran across them on his way here, and we've heard rumors of dozens more groups. Your suspicion that the Skipple Academy might have been compromised could very well be right. But the monsters that they collected will be an issue long after the mages organizing them to attack have been eliminated. I'm sure that it will come up in the meetings. Prince Russell should be on his way back already, as everyone is showing up early. I wasn't informed of who would be doing the negotiations. However, he is in the area, and he is the older sibling, so it will most likely be him assigned as Signia's delegate for the meetings. It is uncommon for the host to also be the assigned representative, after all. It's simply too much work. Prince Fahad explained. Dominic nodded. I can see how that would be the case. The duties of hosting a major event can take up every waking minute, even with guests as undemanding as yourself and Prince George. If it was a pair of pampered, noble negotiators, I can see our staff working themselves to the bone just trying to keep up with the demands. But that reminds me of a fun story. Did you know that the first trip I took with Princess Alexis as her advisor, they put me in a separate tower on the other side of the Burton Palace? The prince snorted in amusement, then tried to play it off as a cough into his sleeve. Don't tell me that they sent a bed maid to your room after you were married? Prince Fahad wheezed. No, this was before we were married. Fortunately for the one that they did send to my room. Though, she did end up poisoned, so it's not all fortunate for her. But that's another story for another day. So, you were the princess's personal royal advisor before you were wed? I'm not certain that I follow the timeline of your adventures after leaving Wavemates. Fahad asked. You could say that I made a speed run of positions within the Signia Royal Palace this year. I started as an apprentice weaponsmith, then royal sorcerer, then gunsmith, then there was a war, and they gave me the title of duke about the time that I got married to the princess. Fahad nodded slowly. I immediately regret asking. Dominic smiled. They let me invade Dagos, and I made new mortar launchers. Fahad rolled his eyes. I actually knew that part already. And about the high-altitude airships with Magitech cannons. Those worked even better than expected. I know that there were some concerns about other inventions, but the airships were a masterpiece. Dominic agreed. Just remember that flamethrowers and Magitech shotguns are violations of the conventions on war. Prince Fahad joked. So, I've been informed. That was one of the considerations when we were making man-portable mortars. However, the scholars determined that they were lethal artillery and not intended to wound or maim. Fahad was more concerned about what an entire unit equipped with portable artillery would look like on the battlefield. That wasn't even a sporting advantage. Times might be changing with technology, but some things were sacred. But that advantage did explain why Signia suddenly had so little trouble keeping Dagos in check, after the invading armies had nearly reached the capital mere weeks earlier in the conflict. Should we join the others? Dominic suggested when he realized they had gotten sidetracked. Certainly. Prince George should have had plenty of time to catch up by now, and they're certainly waiting on us. Fahad agreed. Indeed, they were. The door to the smoking room was open, and there was a maid waiting outside the door for them. My lady, Prince Fahad of Axbridge has arrived. The maid announced the moment that the two men stepped into the hallway. We definitely kept them waiting. Dominic whispered. Fahad winked at him. I'm blaming you. No offense, but your wife terrifies me. The maid frowned at the interaction. Weren't those two getting along far too well for a pair of nobles who had only met a few minutes ago? She would have to keep an eye on them, in case there was hidden history that she should be aware of. Chapter 338. Escaping Politics. Dominic let the maid do the introductions, and then excuse himself with the flimsiest of excuses, claiming that he was going to check on the remainder of their guests. The two sets of royal guards were technically nobles, Dominic assumed. There was only a slim chance that someone who was from common breeding would ever reach such a position, and even then, they were likely to have at least been given the title of knight to dignify them. Gentlemen, have you all settled in well enough? Was there anything that you needed? Dominic asked when he saw two soldiers, one from each detachment, standing at the bottom of the stairs. We are quite well, Your Grace. Protocol demands that we guard the stairs to the sleeping quarters. The Axbridge guard explained. And that meant they had to be ready at all times, so it was pointless to offer them a chair. Let me or one of the maids know if there is anything. Dominic agreed, then headed for the kitchen to see how Beth and Liz were doing. There were 6 other women in the room when he arrived, all in maids' uniforms, but not veiled maids. That must have been arranged when Alexis realized that they were going to need even more staff for dinner service, but once the house was expanded, they would need them full-time anyhow. Chef, do you have everything that you need? I just wanted to check on dinner arrangements. Beth waved a towel at him. Shoo, we're fine. The ladies will put out the extra tables in a bit. Now go do whatever it is that you need to finish before dinner. Dominic sighed, and the aging cook laughed. You're hiding from the political meetings with the royals, aren't you? Dominic winked at the cook, then looked out the back door. I think I hear Farrier Jasmine calling for help. See you at dinner. The cook laughed as he raced out the back door, and then laughed harder when she realized that the farrier really was in trouble again. Only, for once it was not the goats that were giving her a hard time. A valve on the tractor had stuck open, and no matter what she did, it simply refused to release. Dominic laughed as he hopped up on the moving tractor and grabbed a rubber mallet. Here we go, nice and gentle. The hit that he landed on the front of the valve was neither nice nor gentle. But it shook the valve enough that when he grabbed the lever, the valve had come unstuck and pressure started to vent from the overflow. I see the issue. Too much pressure caused the internals to bend. Just don't open it up all the way for a bit, and you'll be able to finish out the day. He explained. What brings you outside? The farrier asked curiously. I'm terrible at hiding my intentions, aren't I? Trying to keep up all the polite and courteous stresses me out, so I ran away for a bit to get some fresh air. Dominic replied. Well, you've got lots of time to practice now. Who knows, they might make a proper duke of you eventually. Jasmine joked.
True.
We've got a lot of new arrivals coming, enough to make Westover into a proper city, so we're going to be upgrading and expanding everything. But on that note, I will go check on the new building before I go back in. Dominic made another escape, headed into town. The new construction was already rapidly underway, with the 3 teams spread out through town, all working on separate projects, while the existing architect and the mages of the Purity sect focused on the convention center. With an entire team to assist them, the building was already beginning to look like a proper structure, even if it was just a shell. Unfortunately for Dominic, that meant that he really didn't have a good excuse to continue to be out of the house. Everything was in order. The new buildings were well ahead of schedule, and even from here, he could see that the camps had been set with proper military precision, and that there had been a produce delivery to them from the market. It was good to be surrounded by competent people, but when you really didn't want to be stuck indoors talking about complex political issues, they didn't leave you much to do. So, all that was left was for Dominic to wave hello to Pops, who was out in front of the forge with Mead, altering the clothesline so that 2 short people could more easily work it. The sight was rather amusing, but they had a most excellent system designed, with a wrought iron ladder and platform, so they could hang the clothes on the sunnier south side of the forge high enough that they weren't behind the fence. Most of the time, Pops would dry his laundry in the forge, but it seemed that getting it some fresh air had won the argument today for one reason or another. Possibly so that the clean clothes didn't smell like soot and soap. That wasn't something that Pops had ever been too concerned about, and Dominic thought that the new apprentice might be a good influence on him. If he was worried about smelling clean, then he was thinking about going outside the forge. That was a rare thought for the old dwarf. Could it be that he found someone he wanted to impress? Or was he just thinking of his apprentice's reputation? Mead was too young for marriage, but she would need to start building a good reputation for when she was old enough. The world would run out of dwarves if they were all as devoted to bachelorhood as Pops. Though, looking at him now, he almost looked like a fatherly figure. Dominic waved at the pair on his way past, then finished his loop of town with a stop at the market where Betty and Captain Brass were stopped at the bakery, picking up a load of fresh bread and a cake. An Axbridge airship commander's birthday is today. They wanted a second run made, so that they could surprise him with a birthday cake. It would be too obvious if they sent someone into town while the rest of the unit was setting up camp. The captain explained. But nobody will question a shipment of fresh bread. They'll just think that it's a gift from the commanders. Good work. Just let me know if they give you any trouble. Chapter 339. Work in Progress. Dominic went straight to the smoking room when he made it back into the house. The atmosphere was cordial, but somewhat tense, with everyone focused on the political implications of their discussion and not the light-hearted discussion of potential problems that Dominic had been having earlier. Duke Dominic, you're just in time. We were just discussing the housing situation and the changes to be made to the manor in advance of the arrival of the other dignitaries. Prince Fahad greeted him. A nice light conversation, then. Do we perhaps lack a specific fabric that is needed? I am told that the local tailor has a lovely Kyrian cotton that resists staining and maintains temperature well in warm climates. Dominic replied. The prince smirked and Alexa sighed. She should have known that he had absolutely no clue what the issue was. No, the problem isn't the sheets, though those are a wonderful option. I use them at home as well. The issue is one of dignity and propriety. You see, we can't have the dignitaries of different delegations on different floors. The change in floors implies a change in rank. However, we also can't have delegations sharing a floor, as that is a security risk. So, the design that has been proposed is entirely unsuited to the events that are coming in the near future, and it would be inappropriate to ask the envoys to stay at another location. Prince Fahad explained. It would imply that you do not trust them in your own home. An insult to the foreign envoys, and an open insult hinting at treasonous notions when done to your own. Prince George added. So, we can't make a family-style compound? Dominic asked. You could if the buildings were attached. Fahad agreed. Dominic smiled. In that case, I think that I can come up with a suitable design. There are many similar compounds within the town, and I am familiar enough with the setup that it would be easy to create additional compounds with equal access to the central house. That should put each envoy or guest in equal housing and give them the privacy that they need without compromising security. How do you propose that any of them won't be viewed as preferable? Prince George asked. Dominic shrugged. I was thinking of arranging them around the main manor, but having the covered walkways all gather at the back garden porch. That way, they all come in the same entrance, and if they're the same distance away, they'll be as close as possible in status. That's not bad. Most palaces have towers for just this reason. It puts everyone in an accessible spot, but separated for security. Your property has some space, so you could do it with a compound. However, you'll need to upgrade the walls as well. This simply isn't acceptable for envoys. Fahad insisted. Alexis sighed. We have royal guards everywhere. How is the wall not sufficient? It doesn't make the minimum standard for royal lodging during stays of over 7 days. Fahad insisted. Alexis nodded. I see. It does meet the Signia standard, which I had assumed was sufficient. Dominic thought about the options. What about a secondary wall? Outside the primary wall, and higher for sturdy defense. That will make the inner wall a garden wall, and the outer the defensive perimeter, without sacrificing much of our view. The manor is on a slight hill, so a taller wall placed further from the house won't significantly block the light. It does have to be higher than the windows of all the bedrooms, though. Prince George added. Higher than the windows? All right, we can work with that. Perhaps I should arrange for them to make something fancy? A 20-meter statue of myself and the princess at the gate would be stunning. Dominic joked. Alexis glared at him, while Prince Fahad laughed. It's not against the rules. The royal palace has a similar statue of the first king at the gate.
No.
Alexis insisted. We have been vetoed. No giant statues of myself at the gates. But I can do a secondary wall that is higher than the existing one to give us room to stage troops between the two if we need to defend the manor. Dominic agreed. Alexis smiled. That's the first sensible thing that you've said today. Should we bring in the royal infrastructure team? They will know how to do just what we need, and they might have ideas on design features that I have overlooked. There is certainly something that would make it better than expected when we've got so much magic available and a whole royal team. If they weren't footing the bill, it became much more reasonable to do a massive renovation and expansion all at once, with custom details and extensive magitech. They could give them all the luxuries and even start making up random things that the nobles could talk about when they got home. It didn't even have to be practical. It just had to be memorable. Something like a dehumidifier so that the nobles from desert regions could feel more at home during the rainy season. Magitech fireplaces did dry the air a little, but not nearly as much as an actual wood fire. It would keep the house from getting damp and musty, but for those used to the desert, it would still feel like Stancha province. Making fussy rich people feel at home was one of the great challenges of hosting. Dominic had learned that from an innkeeper many years ago, and the memory surfaced when they started talking about all the little rules and requests that the envoys were likely to insist upon. Which also meant that they should get the Merchants Guild to import dozens of new interior bedding sets so that they could decorate the envoys' suites to suit their home nations, should they not be satisfied with the Wavemates' usual styles. The more he thought about it, the more that got added to the list. Chapter 340, Nuance. The maids brought over a stack of paper and some pens so that everyone could write down the ideas that they had and the conflicting rules of their nations. Fortunately, the men who arrived were veterans in the art of political negotiation, and they were already aware of the rules that were applied by other nations who were likely to arrive in the near future. Right now, it was mostly to sort the issues between the nations bordering Signia, but in the future, they were likely to see visitors from all over the eastern side of the nation. If we start with the specific items that you would like to have or see as a requirement, then add the items that you know should be included for other nations' requirements. That will really help speed up the process. We were going to have the team start right away, but if the existing design isn't going to work, then we should at least make an effort to get them a workable design as soon as possible. Dominic suggested. The two princes shared a conspiratorial smile, while Alexis sighed. Husband, you have missed the nuance to this topic. If you let them run wild, they will treat the renovation as if it were their own home, and the budget as unlimited. It's best to get ahead of them and set their expectations as low as humanly possible. She insisted. Our dear royal cousin has so little faith in us. Certainly, The young Duke Wistover will be more reasonable about our thoughts on the redesign of the manor? Prince Fahad joked. Alexis winked at him. Remember, this is also his ancestral home. All sorts of legacy, history, and memories attached. The prince sighed. Well, we're already doing decently to come up with separate villas within the estate. Alexis nodded. That was a brilliant idea, I do say. Most just put up a dividing wall and make the upper floors into separate wings. Dominic snapped his fingers, getting everyone's attention. So that's why there's always staircases at either end of the grand ballroom. Because you can't walk all the way around the upper floors, they're blocked. The royals nodded. For exactly this reason. You can't have spies, assassins, and horny drunkards wandering between different wings of the house during parties and events. If the upper levels are divided, then they should only show up where they belong, unless they snuck past the guards. It didn't take long to come up with a full list of updates that were needed to make the manor suitable for multiple royal envoys. In fact, Dominic likely could have made the list work with their existing upgrade plans. However, the idea of turning it into a defensible compound like the other family compounds gave them a good feeling. Surely, they would still find reasons to fight over who got which villa. That much was inevitable within the world of political posturing. However, it would also meet all their requirements, as well as giving them much more room to move around, instead of being all crowded within one large defensible building. The military aspect was the part that was going to need the most work, Dominic realized. With multiple royals here, there was a real chance that someone would send a proper army against them, and that they would need to hold until reinforcements arrived from a third country. But in the age of Magitech, the old designs were not nearly as effective as they used to be, and Dominic found that he was going to need to come up with a whole new plan for their defensive strategy. With Magitech cannons and airships, simply putting up a stone wall wouldn't stop anyone for long. They could get the mages to enchant it, which would be necessary, no matter what they decided. But they needed something that was going to be much more durable. A walled city didn't seem practical at the moment, as they were expecting a large expansion of the population, and their current population wasn't high enough to host the soldiers who were coming to accompany the envoys. So, they would start with the manor, and then decide on the rest as they went. Then Dominic realized one more important fact. Their newly equipped town guard wasn't much of a defensive force, considering the armies camped outside of town. They were going to have to train and equip even more soldiers, then find something for them to do between international gatherings so that they weren't expecting a population to support more soldiers than there were farmers. The whole situation was a bit of a mess right now, but they could count on the troops that the princes brought to do most of the actual work. Perhaps they should allow some of them to come keep watch on the walls when they were visiting? That sounded like a good plan, but Dominic had no idea if it was against protocol. And this was why he had wanted to escape. He was about to suggest that they get an artist for their visions, which would put off the serious discussions for a few minutes, giving him time to plan. But Alexis was way ahead of him, and engineer Marcos came in behind one of the veiled maids, already carrying a whole stack of design drawings. The way that he was fumbling with them, they were clearly hastily assembled, possibly drawn by his team in the last hour. That made Dominic feel a bit better. At least he wasn't the only one who was struggling with what needed to be done here. More importantly, there was now a proper professional in the room, and he could come up with all the design sketches for them, following the guidelines that the royals had come up with. Of course, being a royal engineer, Marcos already knew what the rules were for all of Signia's allies. Every major estate was built to at least marginally comply, and then the local lord would apologize for the humble nature of their estate when it didn't quite meet some of the visitors' requests and expectations.